Good morning, everybody. Good morning and welcome to our webinar, the Officeless Non-Profit. My name is Alan Reed. I'm Director of Client Projects with Hart Square. I have some co-panelists with me today. So could I ask Rob, would you mind introducing yourself? And then Mike, do you mind introducing yourself after Rob?
Yep, no worries. I'm Rob DeBell. I've just realised my job title's wrong on this slide, actually. I'm actually the Managing Director of the consultancy practice, but I used to be Director of Technology and Services, and ultimately the role is about overseeing the projects and the work that we do with clients.
Great, thank you, Rob.
Hi, I'm Mike. I'm the Head of Technology at Amnesty International, the UK section.
Terrific, terrific. Thank you very much. So great. Let's get started. So first of all, I'd like to start with some opening remarks. So the webinar today is about successful remote working, remote collaboration, how to manage projects, and how to have successful virtual events in a world where we're not in the same building at the same time. I'll just keep the Hart Square thing really brief. All we do is work in the not-for-profit sector. We focus on charities and membership bodies. I guess the only point I'll mention is that we're religiously independent of any software or software provider. So we're talking about a whole bunch of tools today, from webinar tools to messaging tools to tool collaboration and task management tools. We don't sell any of them. We are not on a bung from any software provider anywhere in the world. So really, we're just giving information and costings and some brief comments about them, but we're independent of any software provider anywhere. Okay, so a little bit about webinar etiquette. So the session is being recorded. Since most people are only viewing, there's not too much of an implication about that, but any questions that come up in the Q&A will also obviously be part of the recording. The slides will be provided, so no need to be doing mad scribbling. They'll be provided if you could fill in the feedback form afterwards. With the feedback form, we're not remotely interested in your data. We're not able to use it anyway. It's only to help us run better events. So if there's anything you didn't like about today, please tell us. If there's anything you do like about today, please tell us. I've already mentioned the Q&A. We're going to have a little Q&A session at the end. So feel free to direct questions to anybody or to Mike directly, for example. There's a Q&A box that you'll notice within Zoom. And then we'll tackle those at the end. There's also a chat box. Please only use that if you're having technical support or difficulties, and then one of our team will respond on the chat as well. And then this is really for the panelists. If you can make sure your microphone is on mute unless you're actually speaking. Thank you very much. Okay, there's the agenda. We're covering home working, collaboration and task management, and knowledge management, and then virtual events. Okay, so first of all, we are obviously doing a lot of work with charities and other non-profits at the moment. Some of them have paused projects. The great majority are carrying on. And we keep hearing the theme of, well, you know, during this time, and we're going to work differently during this time. So it is tempting to think businesses will return to normal in a few months' time. We think differently. I saw this cartoon the other day, and on the one hand, I think, yes, it's making a valid point. It has, you know, being a big wake-up call to an awful lot of organizations. But in other ways, I don't agree with it. I think the reality is that the COVID thing might have brought things to the fore, but it's highlighted issues that have been around for a very long time and will continue to be relevant and will continue to matter to nonprofits, you know, next year and pretty much permanently. So whilst it is tempting to think business will return to normal and it return to the way it was in a few months' time, we think the reality is this. First of all, we're hearing a lot from nonprofits. Why on earth are we spending hundreds of thousands of pounds a year on office space. I had this conversation again on Friday from a very large nonprofit spending many hundreds of thousands of pounds a year, and realizing that they're able to work, and there's an awful lot that they can do that doesn't require everyone being in the same room at the same time. Staff, of course, are asking about the personal side, and are they going to be expected to return to spending thousands of pounds and taking two or more working days a week just getting to work? Likewise, we've been forced to ask the question: do we all need to be together physically in one place in order to work together effectively? And of course, the answer is no. So what's now pretty clear is that a lot of this stuff is going to continue to be different. When it comes to things like events, for instance, we don't expect that people are going to rush to be in the same room with hundreds of people again anytime soon. We're not expecting community fundraising to be the same, and we're not expecting day-to-day working for nonprofits to be the same. These are issues, and it's been highlighting issues that we at Hart Square have been talking about for years. We live in the non-for-profit sector. It's all we do. We revere the sector, so we don't say this stuff lightly. But for an awful long time, we've been saying that the not-for-profit sector is incredibly inefficient when it comes to its own management of time and intellectual energy, and its most expensive resources. So not-for-profits themselves are asking, how do we best carry out our mission? How do we best get the most effective use out of our people? How do we stop people, getting miffed and leaving and feeling that it's impossible to do any kind of task? And this isn't a COVID thing. It isn't about the current situation. It's a permanent challenge. So realistically, the new normal is going to be very different. We're expecting a lot of the changes and realizations to stay different. We're seeing that successful nonprofits will be those that adapt, the ones that actually take this as an opportunity to invest in themselves, to make themselves nimbler, more enabled, better able to cope with change, and better able to carry out tasks and have an idea and to execute it, and not be dependent on endless meetings and chasing each other with to-do lists. In another way of putting it, what nonprofits have been doing for many years, and by the way, we CRM and fundraising systems and grants management systems and digital engagement are our bread and butter. We do it all the time too. But what nonprofits have been doing for many years is looking after the external stakeholder to secure that vital income. So we all understand that. But the simple message here is that, and this is, we all understand the point of this, you have to look after yourself a little bit first in order to be able to do that critical mission. So in order to be in a good position to carry out your mission, you've got to look at yourself first, and then put yourself in that position where you are efficient and enabled to do that. So I'd like to carry out a very brief survey, if I may. So I'm just going to launch a quick survey that you should see on your screen. And if you wouldn't mind just highlighting the multiple choices on this poll for tools that your organization may still be doing. Okay, so I can see the answers coming in, and the results, not to be too much of a spoiler alert, but they're terrifying. Great, I'm going to pause the poll in a couple of seconds. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm going to share the results of that. So what we're seeing here, does your organization still? So one of the most common things here, pretty much everyone on the webinar is still managing shared tasks via emails, Excel, and bombing each other's inboxes with multiple different tasks. So pretty much everyone is still in that position. That's not great, but it's not unexpected either. We still have staff using their Outlook as their filing cabinet. Essentially, for a lot of organizations, the only place they trust is their Outlook, which is an awful position to be in for information sharing or version management or any kind of collaboration. And then, yes, document and version control is a huge problem. And then have a rat's nest of folders where no one can find anything and no one knows what's the latest version. So knowing all of that and knowing it's happening all over your organization, it would be very easy to put statistics and costs to how much that's actually costing in terms of your resource and your overall spend. Great, thank you very much for that. Okay. So what I'd like to talk about, and it's borne out by the survey results. Thank you very much. Is a lot of the very typical bad behaviours that we see. So first of all, we've done surveys of our own clients, and we asked the middle management team, how many meetings are you having a day? And we get the answer back, between 4 and 7 meetings every day. And I'm sure many of us on the webinar recognize that. So what we get is 4 to 7 meetings a day, all of the problems that come from that. So your diary and meeting rooms getting overflowed, the wasted time in trying to find common slots for everybody. No one's got any time to actually do anything in between these meetings. So one of the, we survey people about stress levels as well. And one of the common things that we're finding is essentially because people are running around from these meetings all of the time, having no time to actually do anything substantial, that generates an awful lot of stress, and it's incredibly bad for the well-being of your organization, never mind the monetary cost. So everyone assembles at these meetings with our notepads. Then ensues to-do list warfare, where you're trying to choose who does what and duck anything coming your way. Then the worst thing that happens after that, if you're having, let's say, five or 6 meetings a day, that's only one day. Then you're doing that 4 and 5 days a week. 25 meetings a week, talking about different tasks, etc. And if the most common way, as we've just seen on the survey, of keeping each other up to date on those tasks is by email, where everyone's copied and everyone replies to all, and it just generates the email inboxes where it's just this cesspit, where if you can imagine it as this kind of horrible mess, and if you want someone to do something, the last thing you want to do is to come along and chuck something into this horrible mess, but it's what we're all doing all of the time. There are consequences to that: stress on staff, lots and lots of frustration, lots and lots of make work, as we're just deleting emails all the time and not able to see what's going on. Little actually goes on. So organizations, we see it all of the time, they have this culture of feeling we are just rubbish, we can't do anything, projects take forever to get off the ground, there's no point in having a good idea around here. And then of course people go around and do exactly the same thing again. They will arrange a meeting to talk about a campaign, arrange a meeting to talk about this or that initiative or task that needs doing, and then just inbox each other until everyone is exhausted. So that's some of the very common bad behaviors, and it seems like most people on the webinar are experiencing that. More common problems and challenges: lost knowledge. So we have a lot of people essentially where there's version madness. As an aside, if anyone in your organization is sending emails with attachments to each other instead of links to documents that are stored in a shared place, then you've got version madness, lost versions, confusion, lots and lots of wasted time. Of course, the normal complaints: people can't find stuff. Then people leave and they take all of the knowledge with them. These are really common scenarios we hear about all of the time, and yet non-for-profits don't address them. They carry on addressing external projects, digital transformation projects, CRM and fundraising projects, they don't address these challenges. I only trust Outlook. We saw that in the survey. We've seen people with an inbox with over 10,000 items in it. 10,000 items in your inbox. It's very, very common to have many, many hundreds or thousands of items in your inbox. So people have kind of forgotten, they're not using Outlook for what it's intended for. And they're doing it in self-defense. They're not against their non-profit. They're just doing it in self-defense because it's the only place they trust. Staff frustration. It's astonishing how much of things like staff turnover are linked to an organization's inability to carry out fairly ordinary projects and tasks, whilst not being able to just sink in a swamp of unwanted messages. So we get an attitude of everything is impossible. So this isn't just applying to the big projects like major software changes, major digital changes, etc. This is every single campaign or a change in the way that you manage your membership. It becomes everything is impossible because everything just sinks beneath the mass of communications and other emails. If I could just do another quick survey, I'd be grateful. So I'd like to ask, please, about people's challenges. Challenges about home working. So if I could just get people to tell us how they found the transition into working from home. Obviously, there was a shutdown on the 23rd of March. Was it a major shock to the system and the whole organization went into spasm? Or was it a relatively seamless transition? Okay, I'm going to shut down in a few seconds. Thank you. And then I'll share results. So great. So one thing that's pretty encouraging is that people are saying the transition to home working was relatively easy. I've had people comment, thank goodness this didn't happen in 2002 or something, before most of the tools and smartphones came about. So what we're finding is that the physical transition of people not having to be in the same building hasn't been too bad. However, we're still hearing an awful lot of people saying, well, we can't make decisions. The committees aren't meeting. We're not able to do anything major, treating it as if the organization could go into limbo for a few months, just ticking over. So the physical transition is okay, but effective working, we tend to find is much more of a problem. Okay, thank you very much for that. I'd like to just hear what it's been like on the ground, if I may. So, Mike, do you mind if I ask you a few questions?
Sure, that's what I'm here for.
Terrific, terrific. Thank you very much. So, could I ask, in terms of just home working, how do you feel that Amnesty has adapted since the 23rd of March to now? How's that journey been?
It's been easier than I feared. As you alluded to, I'm so pleased it happened now rather than even 5 years ago. I think we would have struggled.
Sure.
But it's yeah, but it's hard to say for the whole charity because every department works differently. So
yes.
I suspect. Right. Sorry, I was about to say I suspect, like most organisations, the finance departments are still wedded to paper, like ours is, and they've had a much harder time transitioning.
Well, that takes me to my next question, actually. Do you feel that as an organisation, productivity overall has reduced? I mean, how do you find things like being able to run campaigns, to be able to execute fundraising, for people to be able to do their day-to-day jobs? I mean, after all, not all of your systems are cloud-based.
As you well know. However, we already had a working from home policy. We had Citrix in place. We'd started to roll out VPNs onto the new Windows 10 laptops. So we're already quite well placed to transition to that. We just had to ramp everything up. The problem came with with paper-based processes. That's what slowed us down. So our digital campaigning teams, the fundraising teams, they've all been working from home really effectively. They've been really efficient and good. Some of the more traditional background departments are having to find workarounds that are maybe not as efficient as we would like.
Great, then thank you. And are you able to say what are the main tools, and even what's the most important tool that Amnesty have adopted?
It's Teams. It's always Teams.
Always Teams.
Everything is Teams. Yes, we hadn't really used it before. We were kind of going, well, we don't quite know what this is. Is it an instant messaging system? Is it a front end to SharePoint? What is it? But we basically made the decision as soon as we thought there might be a lockdown happening that we would go all in on Teams. And unusually, we didn't do 1,400 stakeholder meetings and a collaborative decision. We just made the decision we're going to use Teams, and we pushed it out to everybody. We pushed the app out to all the smartphones. We got it on all the tablets, made sure it was all there, and we started pushing out content and how-to guides as well. But I without wishing to blow smoke up Microsoft, the Teams, I think it's been a huge success.
Great. And can I ask you, so there are different levels of Teams. So we use Teams a lot. We use it internally. We're using Zoom now because we find Teams to be rubbish at webinars. If you're doing public-facing webinars and you want to have a panel role and you want to have a separate Q&A and etc. So Zoom is great for that, but we use Teams a lot to the point where we stop phoning each other and it's all Teams. Do you use Teams at the level of just for meetings, or of course there's task management within Teams? You can do shared whiteboarding, you can upload documents and share them. What level do you think Amnesty are using Teams to?
So it's definitely replaced the phone system, video conferencing, one-to-ones, small meetings, even quite large meetings. We're storing files there, which obviously is connected to SharePoint at the back end. Whiteboard usage. We've started to make use of some of the planner facilities as well. I mean, it is a poor man's Trello, but it is functional. So yeah, we are using the functionality, but like yourself, where we're conducting external things with large groups of people and we need a panel and a speaker type thing, that functionality is not there. So various departments, so the human rights educators, for instance, they use Zoom. So we've been working very closely with them, monitoring the security, because
there's and we find, by the way, with Zoom, if you lock it down sufficiently, then it's fine, but don't just go with the default settings.
Oh yes.
Could I ask about your in-person events? I know it's not your specialist area, but you enable. How has that changed at Amnesty, i.e. they're not happening? So how has Amnesty responded to that?
Well, so we have two types of things. So we run activist networks and the human rights education that I just mentioned. They're all happening virtually in arenas like this. They're still going ahead and being quite successful. But we also run in-person events in our auditorium in the Human Rights Action Centre in London. And they've had to stop completely. So that is a problem for us. There's no way around dealing with that. And
is there an alternative, or have you simply stopped the program for a time?
No, we've just stopped that because it's an external thing that we rent out. It's an income revenue to us for people running events like this.
Yes, I see. Thank you. And then can I ask you then? Looking back over what you've done, what Amnesty did in the run-up, and not knowing that the shutdown was coming, and since the shutdown, what do you think Amnesty could have done differently or better to prepare itself?
Yeah, so the thing that I wish that we'd had the foresight to realise is how long this might go on for. So we, as an IT, we prepared for a short, sharp lockdown, 3 weeks, a month, maybe 6 weeks. And that's what we prepared for. We didn't prepare for a whole quarter, and then when we come back, whatever that's going to look like, but it will certainly involve some form of social distancing. We didn't really prepare for that, so we're having to create that on the fly as we go. So, I mean, as an example, I'm sat here in my office. It's quite nice. I've got a decent chair because, you know, I'm old. But a lot of my younger staff that work for me, they're in shared flats. They've got a small flat in the middle of London. They don't have the space to have their own office. It's very difficult for them. They're all sitting on settees with laptops on their knees. I can see all sorts of physical problems coming up in the longer term.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, and extremely difficult for organisations to anticipate.
Yeah.
And then just before, I'm going to ask Mike a final question, but just to let everyone know, so we've got just over 50 people on the webinar. Please post in the Q&A area if you have further questions for Mike or any of us, and then we'll do our best to pose them to Mike before the end of the webinar. So final question for you, Mike. Before we press on, in the future, do you feel like Amnesty is going to revert back, thinks it's going to revert back, or do you think that permanent changes are anticipated?
Definitely permanent changes. I guess the game now is trying to predict what those changes are. It looks, as I say, social distancing is going to be here for what, a year? Who knows? We don't really know. People aren't going to be coming back into work that commute in. That people aren't going to want to get on the tube. So we are going to have to work either a mixed economy of people working in the office and working at home more. But that leads to your point at the top of the meeting. Do we need a big office? Why do we need a large office in the middle of London?
Yeah.
That becomes an interesting question. How do we deal with running meetings where half the people are together and half the people are separate? I suspect we're going to be supplying webcams and headsets to everyone and saying that if anyone is working from home, then everyone has to have that as a video meeting and do it that way. Otherwise we are going to start having second-class staff, which is not good for anyone.
Absolutely, absolutely. Great, Mike. Thank you very much for that. And as I say, please do post any further. There's some questions coming in on the Q&A already, so that's great. We'll get to those at the end. And Mike, feel free to chip in as Rob and I waffle on as well. So what does good look like? We've talked about a number of the bad habits that are out there and the challenges that a lot of not-for-profits have. So a little bit about remote working versus collaboration. So pretty much everyone in the not-for-profit world has succeeded in moving to remote working because there's no choice. And you basically just need a device and an internet connection. So whoopee, we've all managed that. But as the survey showed, collaboration, working as a team, being able to effectively focus on common goals, that's been a lot less successful in the transition. But the fact is, and this is the drum Hart Square have been banging for years, organizations have been a lot less successful about that forever. With working through using Excel and inbox bombing each other and making it very, very difficult for people to know what they're expected to do where the status of a task is at any time, and where they're supposed to contribute. So the principles we find of successful collaboration are really, everyone focuses on the tech. And the reality is that it is the job in many organizations with an IT team, that the IT team will deliver the tech and make sure it works. But the great majority of the project is not about the tech. The IT team typically cannot force people to use things and to bring about change. That really requires leadership. So when we do projects, and by the way, you can go to 100 different places to get a project around this or to get external help. But when we do it, we always start at the top of the organization, because if you're essentially, if you don't have the buy-in of the senior management team and their willingness to reinforce change through various mechanisms that we tell them about, then you're really on a hiding to nothing. It's a people and change project, and change is hard, by which I mean, it's very easy to set out some principles saying we should never send attachments to each other. We should never send each other emails copying lots of people internally about any given task. But when we should never store stuff on our own devices, etc., etc. Lots of we should never do's to accompany we should do's. But if people carry on not doing it and carry on working in the bad way, they will. People will keep backsliding. Then there needs to be a way of telling them that, of having it understood that it is part of our mission. It is part of our organizational strategy to deliver these changes. And if you're not delivering those changes, you're not working towards our organizational strategy, and we can't have that. There needs to be a little bit of grumpiness. There needs to be people getting told if they don't make the changes. So this kind of change, and it is about people, leadership, and vision with enabling tech. And it requires collaborative processes. It requires setting out the vision. It requires reinforcement as people backslide continually to the point where it becomes part of the culture and the DNA within the organization. However, there needs to be enabling tech as well as somewhere to sit, as Mike was saying, in order to make this work. So the typical tool types, so we just want to give some pragmatic advice, some pricing, some costing and tools choices. Some typical tools that are out there that you typically must have. You must have some form of messaging tool so that people can have conversations, much more like a WhatsApp conversation than a series of copied inbox conversations. There must obviously be some form of video conferencing, some way of sharing knowledge, and not just documents, but documents are very, very important. So everything becomes a link instead of an attachment. No putting version names saying, project campaign plan new, campaign plan really, really new, none of that kind of stuff. And then there must be some kind of collaboration platform and some means of managing more complex tasks as well. So some tips around those. We suggest that people don't use email for anything apart from external conversations and doing things by exception. With video conferencing, if you can't insist, then at least encourage video. It helps with people's isolationism and helps to feel like normal working. Document sharing. Mike and I were talking before about SharePoint. In many organizations we work with, SharePoint becomes a swear word because they simply put it in and expect it just to kind of tick over. In other organizations, including Hart Square, by the way, we live or die by it. We absolutely love it. And the difference is it's exactly the same software. It's how it's imposed, how it's delivered, how it's kept going as a living thing, as opposed to something that's just dumped there and people are left to it. So some common tools. As I say, we're sharing the slides, so no need to make notes, etc. We're going to go into a little bit more detail on these common tools, but that's the tool set you need. One point we would say is try and use as few tools as possible. So you can go really deep in the Google suite, and that can do you for everything. You can go really deep on things like Teams. and use it for a lot of things. So you don't have to have separate things for everything that you do. So I think I've already made that point. It is about leadership, consistency, and constant reinforcement of change. It's not a thing that you can do once and then forget about. Okay, messaging tools. You can read this at your leisure, but we find that there are hundreds of conversations happening all over the place. Hart Square is an organization of 30 people, but there's still hundreds of conversations happening. We don't want them going on by email, and we want someone to come back after a day or two and be able to get a single view of where their project is at or where their task is at, and just look in one place and be able to do it and not look at the garbage pile of their inbox trying to figure it out. So they're all pretty good at what they do. You can see the pricing differences on there. A lot of tools have a free version at the minute, but you know, there's a certain wariness that you have to have at the moment because those free versions will expire when they think they can get away with it. So do have a look at those. There are lots and lots of video conferencing tools, and the difference tends to be about your budget and how sophisticated and complicated your video conferences are going to be. There's a ton of stuff you can do in free Zoom. There's a ton of stuff that you can do in Teams that you might already have that you're paying for as part of your Microsoft licensing. And of course, the Google Suite is largely free to nonprofits. We've got a free version comparison here where there are limitations where, of course, they want to, in many cases, hook you up to the paying version when you hit the limits. A number of them you're never going to hit the limits, so you can actually just carry on using the tools as a free utility for an unlimited period of time.
Can I just chip in there? Sorry.
Yes, please.
So we've been looking at another video conferencing tool called Jitsi, which is also free, and we particularly like it because you can host it yourself, which means it's end-to-end encrypted and completely secure, which for some of our work is essential.
Great. Okay, well, we're happy to put a link to Jitsi in our delegate comms as well. So yeah, thanks a lot for that, Mike. Okay, document sharing tools. I'll just make the point that the tools can all be substantially used to do what you need. Some of them are better than others. I mean, SharePoint, for instance, is very good at version management in that when you save stuff, it keeps the old version up to a limit that your system administrator can control. So, you can then stop people putting version names in the file name and getting into file hell that way. So, whereas some people think that SharePoint is less good at being able to search across lots of content, but there's some of that is a training issue. So lots and lots of tools. The main thing is that you're using something, that you're not just sticking stuff on passive folders and sharing and sending attachments to each other. There's a ton of fun that you can have with project and task management tools and their comparison. We would say that the main thing again is that it's a cultural change to enforce that whenever a work stream starts, a thread starts within the collaboration and task tool, and you essentially get everyone using it. It's no good if part of your organization is using Slack and another part of your organization is using Trello. You just confusion abounds. So how do you go about choosing? This is designed to be comforting, actually. There isn't a huge difference in most of the tech. Most of them can be used to be a vast improvement on working in a rat's nest of folders and sending stuff to each other as attachments and bombing each other's inboxes. So it's a case of looking at what's probably pretty good in the great majority of them. And nothing we've listed doesn't work or is ineffective. And then choosing what's the best fit for you in terms of your budget, your culture. You may have a strategy around Microsoft. You may hate Microsoft like poison, in which case you're more inclined to go to Google, etc. So it involves a little bit of research, but you can't go too far wrong. And we put links and case studies in this slide deck to facilitate that research for you. Poll number 3. I'll keep this quick. If I could just ask about standard tools, and then if you wouldn't mind, just give me your view of if you're consistently, and that word consistently is key, if you're consistently using those tools within your organization. If you've just got one or two people using them, that's less good. But let's see. Great, the answers are coming in, and I'm going to pause polling in a few seconds. Thank you, and then share the results. So great. As we heard at the beginning, everyone is able to use remote meetings and conferencing. We've got essentially about half of the organizations are using some form of knowledge or document management. Although it might be that yes, SharePoint is there, but people swear at it and use it partially and inconsistently and so on. Roughly a quarter are using some form of task management. I'd be interested how consistently across the organization that is. And I'm glad to see there's so much group chat, i.e. or e.g. WhatsApp and Messenger and others of those tools. Great, thank you very much for that. So we just want to get into some take homes and the differences between success and failing before we move on to talking about virtual events. So first of all, one of the biggest challenges with this stuff is making senior management step up. I won't ask any particular organization to comment because it gets too political, but a really common scenario here is that senior management will say, yes, great, we must do this stuff. And we've got quite a few senior management on this webinar, so we mean you. Senior management will say, yes, we must get on and do this stuff, dump it on someone's desk to do, maybe in IT, maybe elsewhere if there isn't an IT department, and then think that their role is to come back every 3 months and shout at people because it's not being used or there haven't been any benefits from this. The reality is that anyone who has the responsibility to do this that doesn't have the authority to make people change the way they work will fail. They're not able to bring these changes about. The most successful projects we've seen are where we guide senior management to, and they agree, they intellectually buy into it and emotionally buy into it, and then set out strict rules saying, look, we've seen that you can do it this way and it works really, really well. So therefore there is no excuse for doing these things. And if you do these things, there will be consequences. You know, we will talk to you about it. That then needs to be reinforced. We've seen people put it in appraisals for staff. We've seen people put it in the handbook for staff. So it's part of the terms and conditions. And there are all sorts of implications for not doing this stuff. You know, people can lose laptops and make you appear on the news. You know, it can be very embarrassing. So senior management must consistently be part of this change and must step up and consistently repeat the messaging. People and Change Project. We say get help if you can afford it. And you can buy that help from 100 different places, as I say. So the IT team can go and do the research and source the tools and create the guidance for it and can do all sorts of things. But they can't make people use them, and very often they're not interested in making people using them. So establishing the right kind of tool set and the right kind of cultural changes and setting them up to succeed is not a big project, but it is pretty specialized and it's about people and change. Distractions are really common. People will keep backsliding. So even at Hart Square, you know, we changed a number of years ago so that you can't send an attachment, you can't send this kind of email, etc. You know, somebody somewhere needs to reinforce it. Somebody somewhere needs to be conscious of it and to be willing to be a nag. Because if you don't have that, nothing will change, nothing will work. and you're in a mix, the worst of all worlds, which is you're in a mixed situation where some of your stuff is on SharePoint and some of your stuff is rotting away in people's inboxes. So it's got to be focused and consistent, and somebody's got to be prepared to talk about it. People don't like change. Essentially, you can put in the tech and neglect the people side, and essentially nothing will happen. You'll get no value or little value out of the tech. Or you can really tackle it head on and understand it's a people and change project, put specific resources and expertise into that, and then you've got the best chance of success and being a much more enabled version of your own organization. Great, we've got some stuff in Q&A for the end, but I'm just going to move on. Rob, do you mind if I hand over to you to talk about virtual events? So you can take yourself off mute, and I'll let you have the sharing if you don't mind.
Thanks, Al. Yep, I've managed the unmute. Now I just have to handle the transition of screen sharing. Wow. Okay, that's the first thing sorted. He says confidently. Yeah, so you should now be able to see the screen. Yeah, and as we were saying, wanted to give a specific piece of time just now, not too long, but to give some overview of virtual events and the challenge and the opportunities actually around that. And the reason for doing that, is, as we all know, events they're a key part really of the engagement strategy for most of the organizations we work with, most of our clients, across the nonprofit sector. So the current restrictions on both gathering numbers together and actually on travel as well that's related to that affect various different niches within the sector in various different ways. Hence it's important to think about it. And as Mike mentioned earlier as well, it's not just, this is not just for here, for now, and then reset in a couple of months' time and back to a new normal. This is about, having a long-term plan, because the challenge that we're facing at the moment has an impact across pretty much everything we do. Within the sector, we're all about building and supporting our communities, and the impact that we're having at the moment is on, how do we educate, how do we share the things you can see on screen, how do we show value, and how do we raise funds. So, despite what some of the social media narrative might be, the answer isn't to, let's just use Zoom and that fixes everything, right? Because everyone's talking about it from Downing Street onwards. But actually, when we talk about virtual events, we're talking about a whole range of different things. A simple, simply looking at the difference between webinars and webcasts, for example. This is a webinar, it's live, it's in person, it's happening here and now from wherever we are, and it allows us to interact, whereas a webcast is completely different. That's something that's pre-recorded, made available, and people can download and look at or watch online, but do it in their own time in a non-interactive way. So virtual events will have that mix of things that are interactive, things that are live, and things that you can do in your own time. And we need to think about the different content that works in those scenarios. A Twitter Q&A, that's a virtual event. A virtual tour, I'll show later, there's a number of museums around the world and are offering now virtual tours because people can no longer physically come to museums and galleries and things like that. And this applies, to classic events, to exhibitions, job fairs and open days. These are things that are part of our fabric, and they have to continue to happen. And now they're going to have to happen in a way that don't require people to travel and don't require people to get together in big rooms or in closed spaces en masse. So, what we're talking about really is that we have to think about a virtual event as a different way to engage, a new way to teach, to share, but actually, it's an opportunity, and that's not about just bandwagoning. It is the reality that this gives us virtual events, taken collectively, give us a flexible way to kind of showcase our work and to help our community, to build the community that we talked about earlier, or that I mentioned, a couple of steps ago. So when we're talking about moving from physical to digital, physical to virtual, we also have to then consider about adapting our approach. It's not as simple as saying, oh, we used to do this in person, we'll just lift it, and deliver it, from your front room across a video camera or a webcam or whatever it may be, or through a stream, And equally, what we want to specifically caution against is just spinning up, a series of broadcast webinars. It's not just about using using digital media as a method by which to tell people stuff. It can't be that. And the real key to doing this and to doing it successfully is actually probably to put the delegate experience first. So as I say, webinars, whether we're talking about as webinars versus webcasts or about broadcasting, the natural tendency to sit in front of a camera and talk, particularly when you can't be heckled as well, which is a relief, is something actually to mitigate against. And we have to really put front and center in our thoughts about how we can engage delegates and get people to, I've seen the numbers, and thankfully people are staying on this webinar, which is really good to see. But we have to put, and we've specifically thought about how we break it up, how we have different pieces of content, different types of content, and focus on having some kind of interaction with people. When we're talking about conferences, and a lot of particularly membership bodies run conferences, and they're, think about having shorter speaking slots, more Q&As, having multiple presenters in sessions rather than having just one person, one talking head, for each of those little sessions or whatever, mixing things up, because you can do different things live versus things you can do pre-recorded, and you can still have an exhibition hall. It's a conversation we've been having actually, specifically within Hart Square as well. There's no reason you can't still have an exhibition hall that people can browse in their own time, and I can't get into all the nuances of how that works now, but effectively you can visit a store, and that prompts somebody somewhere to know that you're there and kind of want to chat with them. So you can still do a lot of the things that we normally do. You can have keynotes, but looking at how to build in an improved delegate experience and to be interactive is a really, really fundamental part of how we plan this. So again, some ideas on screens, about having awards, about using polls and surveys, the sorts of things you've seen today, about having debates, and having questions that panelists are answering. That sort of stuff all helps to actually improve the experience and develop a much more interactive model. Downloads in sessions, it might be a client case study that's only available there that one time. So when it comes to it, like I say, don't just lift and shift. Now is a good opportunity. It's a time to innovate and be brave, and ask your audiences, ask your community how they want to work with you, because they really want you to succeed as well. So it's not a time to be afraid. It's quite natural to kind of fall back on, oh, this is what we know and this is how we know, or this is what we know how to do. But let's push it a little bit. This is a good time to actually test out some new ideas and to listen a bit more and be influenced by a wider range of people, maybe. Because there are lots of benefits to be had here, and particularly when we are thinking of, this time as not just a point in time that will change back and revert, but something that's going to affect what we do. And it was great to see earlier in the poll that, for a number of people, what's happening now is actually about fast tracking an existing strategy, almost giving you that kind of that kick to do things you've talked about doing before. So it's great, a lot of membership bodies and charities and campaign groups have always wanted or long strived to kind of widen their reach, to be more accessible to people who are less mobile, and again, that plays for museums and galleries, you start to remove travel and cost barriers for delegates, and equally to reduce your own costs, so you can deliver more or higher quality events and engagement opportunities. Whilst you're there, if you're engaged in a digital space, there's more opportunity to capture what audiences are actually interested in, because we have this tendency to talk about what we think people are interested in and give our spin on things, but equally to interactively understand what other people are thinking and how they're perceiving what you're saying. Really, really great opportunity, and bottom line there, about creating content once and playing it back, delivering it multiple times. It is important to bear these things in mind, and to see this as there are positive aspects to this. Obviously, there are drawbacks as well. Like I say, there is that thing where virtual is better at broadcasting and less so peer-to-peer engagement. It's harder to break days up, but that just means you've got to think about it and actively put these sorts of things in place. Excuse me. Delegates get distracted on computers, and I think there's a point here about, again, when we're looking long term, about deriving virtual events that will also prosper when delegates are starting to go back in their offices. For us here today, we're probably all working from home, one way or another, and we are kind of focused on the screen and hopefully ignoring that little email notification that potentially pops up in the bottom right. I turned mine off a long while ago. But what will happen when actually those people, you're trying to devise a new strategy that will work when people are back in their offices with the distractions all around them. unfortunately, we can't do much about coffee and cake, but it's always important to think of these things as well, because it's a key part of any of the events that we run. Sorry, I'm conscious of time, so just wanted to kind of name check some of the, again, this will be in the deck, but name check some of the platforms that you can think about when you're looking at, this is events and conferencing solutions. So again, Zoom is not the only game in town. There are a number of tools out there that are worth you investing a bit of time in to have a look at. Very well established, they're scalable, they're very, very well supported as well. These are kind of the organizations who will help you to make the most of these platforms, not just, you don't just sign up and go sort of thing. And equally, particularly on the fundraising side, there's a lot around live streaming, and you can use, the well-established tools that everybody already knows, like the Facebook Lives and the Instagrams and things like that. But move it out, there's Twitch, there's Vimeo, YouTube Live now, a lot of opportunities there to to engage and interact live, and we've seen a lot of virtual fundraising happening already. I mean, obviously, ideally today we would have been sitting here reflecting on a successful, 60+ million pounds worth of funds raised for good causes yesterday at the London Marathon. That wasn't possible, but there are lots of things happening out there already, to enable charities and enable worthy causes to raise funds. I won't run through the list line by line, but you see the sorts of things, donate your commute, sponsor a homepage, use esports, that sort of stuff. I mentioned earlier about tours. We heard yesterday the Chelsea Flower Show is going to go virtual. I mean, you can't really experience a flower, but nonetheless, you can turn up and be walked around a show garden by the designer. I mean, that's pretty cool, actually. That's more accessible than most of us would have had if it was being run in the real world. The National Trust had to close all its gardens, close all its houses, but is now offering virtual tours of a lot of them. And then there's a list of really prestigious organisations, basically, who are now making their collections available to everyone. In a world where we aspire to make things as accessible as possible and as equitable as possible, there's some really great things happening out there. So, we have a choice. We can just sit here and wait for a new normal, and hope for the best and see if we get through it and survive, or we can sit here and we can actually just strategize around this. We can innovate and we can define that new normal, and we can make it work. And I guess that's, if there's a CTA for us and for us as a sector right now, it is that this is our opportunity, and it's time for us to kind of embrace it, just to fast track those things that we want to do about being more equal, being more accessible, being more diverse, and the opportunity is there for us.
Thanks a lot, Rob. That's fantastic, and thanks a lot for clawing back some of the time. So if we could just go to the next slide on the deck you had there, Rob.
Oh, I stopped sharing. I was that good.
The next slide just says Q&A anyway. So
okay.
Whilst Rob's putting that back on the screen, Joyce, could I ask if you wouldn't mind just asking the panel some of the Q&A questions?
Yeah, absolutely. And so we've had quite a few questions, so any we don't cover, we will follow up afterwards. So one question around confidentiality. I'm saying we're an advice agency dealing with sensitive information about people's lives. How secure are different web-based systems for saving info?
And then Rob, do you mind commenting on that? And then Mike, I'll ask you to comment as well, if you don't mind.
Yeah, as with anything that's cloud-based online, whatever, there are challenges around that. But the good thing about using a lot of cloud services is actually, the people that provide those services and those storage platforms, that's their business, and they can invest a lot more in security than we can as individual organizations. So that's to be conscious of it. Also, it's incredibly important to their success. So they are transparent and they will share a lot of information. And there are definitely highly secure encrypted systems out there that should be able to meet your needs. But Mike, sorry, did you want to add to that?
The only thing I'll say is that the advantage you can do is you can pick where your data center is for a lot of the larger organizations. So we are concerned about our data disappearing into the American government at times, given the nature of Amnesty International. So we're conscious that our data doesn't sit on American servers. But that was, yeah, you can do that.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you for that one, Joyce.
And then we had a question from Mike. Do you have external IT support, and how have you managed their provision to staff working remotely in terms of costs?
Yeah, no, we have no external support particularly. We run an in-house team. Our concern is actually more around the fact that we're a small team and what happens when those team become sick, and we have to run on a skeleton team, that's where we've been putting our extra provision. So I can't really address that, I'm afraid.
Thank you very much.
Then we had another question, a general one. Is OneDrive an effective place to store all your documents and remove in-house servers?
Rob and Mike again, then, please.
Shall I start? Because I've got
go
some
for it, Mike.
I've got mixed views. I love OneDrive. I use it all the time. I am very conscious, though, that if I go, then my OneDrive goes with me, and that information disappears. So we are in the process of reworking our leavers policy to try and deal with that problem. But I think OneDrive is nice and secure. You can share a document with exactly who you want, or a folder with exactly who you want, and you can revoke that security. I think it's very good, but it does leave a problem when you leave the organisation.
Yeah, I'd reinforce that, Mike. I agree, and I do use it myself as well. But I think ideally, if you're using OneDrive, if you can take that principle and apply it across actually to a SharePoint installation, a governed SharePoint installation, then that takes you to the next level, which is probably where you would want to be.
Thank you very much, guys. Joyce, another question?
Yeah, this was for all panel members. How do we think people's basic need for human connection in person will be met in the future? For example, relationship buildings, ideas creation, creativity.
I guess, Rob and Mike, I could ask you to comment on what's going on in your organizations.
Do you want to go first, Mike? Or it's a tough and tricky one, actually, because at the moment you can't, right? I mean, it is that simple.
Yeah, we've got virtual teams. We try and do everything via video. So you really see people's faces, you hear their voices, you interact with them. But it is a pale imitation of meeting in person. But
It is.
Yeah, that's all we've got, I think.
Yeah, no, I think it's that is a reality, right? If we're defining the future, then it's going to be hybrid or blended. There's a lot of opportunity we can take from being virtual, but we will not be able to replace, particularly in that networking, peer-to-peer, like you say, ideation, bouncing. I think you can bounce off each other better in a room, and that's just a reality. We are human beings, and it's actually not something we'd want to lose. We just have to find a safer way to do that down the track.
So we do some things at Hart Square just to try and make sure people aren't that isolated. So this morning we had a team meeting where there was no fixed agenda. It was essentially how's it going. Some people made updates to what's going on in their area, but really no fix. And it really was the chat just for 20 minutes and a bit of a laugh. And building that in when you can stand it, I think does help a lot. I physically saw people, well, I saw people on video that I feel like I hadn't seen in quite a time, and it does help. It's only a 20-minute meeting, but it does help. And no fixed agenda, just a chat and a bit of a conversation. We could do it on a Friday with a gin and tonic in hand, I guess. But do what you can in that. Great. I'm conscious of time. We've overrun by 3 minutes. Just in response to another question, we're using Zoom for this meeting with the webinar add-on. So the free Zoom doesn't allow you quite to do the panel roles and so on. The webinar add-on, I think the whole thing then costs about 30 quid a month for doing that. Just in case people are wondering why their Zoom doesn't work, the free Zoom doesn't work quite the same way. Joyce, any final question that's a quickie, and then we'll thank people and sign off.
Yeah, I suppose one that could be a quick one is, how do you deal with physical post? We're all home working at the moment, but one person still has to go into the office regularly to collect physical mail.
Sorry, Mike. Okay.
Yeah, no, we've been dealing with that. I mean, we get checks, still physical checks coming in. So yeah, I'm afraid once a week we send someone in that can get to the office by foot or by bike, and they open the post and scan the checks, and we send an IT person in as well once a week to go and check the servers, because I'm afraid we still have servers in our basement in a horrible traditional manner.
Just very quickly. Just very quickly on the virtual post, we're relatively small, but we've set up, there is a virtual post office service. So we use a service which directs all of our mail down to a third party. They will, you can choose which kind of program you want, but basically they scan the envelopes, we get notified, and then we choose, you can shred that, physically forward that to somebody, and I can give them address, or can have it open scanned, and then I can see it. And actually you can link, I think, to either Evernote or Dropbox, but there are definitely services out there, virtual postbox services, which enable that to become contactless.
Do you want to name check the one we're using?
Oh, blimey, okay. They are called UK Postbox, ukpostbox.com.
Right. Thanks a lot, everybody. Thanks a lot to the panel in particular. So you'll get a quick feedback form at the end of the meeting, and we'll send it to you by email as well. We'll be really grateful for any feedback. As I say, we're not interested in your data. We're only interested in, we can't use it anyway. We're only interested in providing better content and more useful content. So good and bad feedback is really welcome. Thanks very much for your time. Have a great week to everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thanks, Mike.
That was very good, darling. You kept me engaged.